Maria was already struggling. Bills piled up, and her small apartment barely kept out the cold. One rainy afternoon, she saw an elderly man struggling to stand on a crowded bus. Without thinking, she stood up and offered him her seat. She had nothing to give, but she gave it anyway. She didn't know it then, but that simple act would change her life forever. The next day, a letter arrived, a letter that would bring her face to face with a kindness far greater than her own. Maria's life wasn't easy. She worked long hours as a cashier in a small store, and most of her paycheck went to taking care of her elderly mother, who had been sick for months. She lived in a cramped apartment, her only comfort being the quiet mornings before the chaos of the day began. Every night, she would lie awake, wondering if she was doing enough. She always felt she was just a step away from losing it all. But on this particular day, as she boarded the bus to work, Maria was more tired than usual. Her eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, and the weight of her problems seemed to press harder on her chest. She found a small empty spot near the window and sank into it, relieved to rest for just a few minutes. The bus rattled along the streets, and people packed in, some standing, some sitting, but everyone was silent, lost in their own worlds. Then, Maria saw him, an elderly man, bent over with age, struggling to hold onto a railing. He looked frail, his hands trembling, his face lined with years of hardship. He stood for a few moments, but it was clear he wasn't going to be able to keep standing much longer. Maria's heart twisted. She looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. Everyone else was absorbed in their phones or staring out the window. The man's knees buckled slightly, and Maria could see him steady himself by gripping the rail even harder. Without thinking, she stood up and gently tapped him on the shoulder. "Here, please," she said softly, offering her seat. The man looked at her, his tired eyes scanning her face. A flicker of surprise crossed his expression, and then a smile, small but grateful, appeared on his lips. "Thank you," he whispered, lowering himself onto the seat. Maria stood beside him, holding onto the rail, trying not to let the exhaustion show on her face. The bus continued its journey, but for Maria, time seemed to slow. The gesture had been simple, but something about it felt significant. There was no grand reason behind it. She just couldn't bear to see someone struggle when she had the power to help. When her stop arrived, she gathered her things and left the bus. But her heart felt lighter somehow. Little did she know, the act of kindness she had just offered would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The next morning, Maria was running late. The store was busy, and she barely had time to grab breakfast before rushing out the door. The day dragged on, each hour stretching longer than the last. She couldn't stop thinking about the old man from the bus. There was something about his smile that stuck with her, and for a brief moment, she wondered if maybe there was more to life than just surviving. But then reality hit her. She couldn't afford to daydream. There were bills to pay and a mother who needed her. After her shift ended, Maria walked home in the early evening. The streets were quieter now, but her mind felt crowded. She wasn't used to feeling good about anything. Helping the old man had felt like the right thing to do. But was it enough? She asked herself if she was truly making a difference in the world, or just getting by, like everyone else. When she got home, her mother was already resting in the corner of the small living room. Maria kissed her forehead and began to prepare a simple meal. She was just setting the table when the doorbell rang. Maria froze, wondering who it could be. It was too late for anyone to be stopping by. She opened the door cautiously, and to her surprise, standing there was a delivery man holding a large envelope. "Is this for Maria Hernandez?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," she replied, confused. She signed for it, and the delivery man handed her the envelope before leaving without a word. Maria stared at the thick envelope in her hand. It was unmarked. No return address. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be something important? Something urgent? Her hands trembled as she carefully tore it open. Inside was a letter, folded neatly. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words written in elegant handwriting. "Dear Maria, you may not remember me, but I will never forget your kindness. The seat you gave up on the bus yesterday meant more than you know. I have seen many acts of kindness in my life, but yours stood out. I am a man of wealth, and I have watched you from afar. Your strength, your heart, and your quiet sacrifice have inspired me. I would like to offer you an opportunity that could change your life. Please meet me tomorrow at the address below. You may not believe this now, but this could be the start of something extraordinary. With respect, the elderly man from the bus. Maria's head spun. She couldn't make sense of it. Who was this person? And why would they be offering her an opportunity? She barely knew the man. And yet, his words were so heartfelt, so full of warmth. Her first instinct was to dismiss it as some sort of prank. But something deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, made her hesitate. Could this really be happening? Was it possible that a simple act of kindness could lead to something this unexpected? She placed the letter on the table, her mind racing. She couldn't deny the curiosity gnawing at her, urging her to take the chance. After all, what did she have to lose? The next morning, Maria woke early, the letter still on the table where she had left it the night before. She couldn't stop thinking about it. She was used to disappointment, to waiting for good things that never came. But this felt different. The words in the letter were sincere, almost too sincere to be real. The idea of someone noticing her, truly seeing her, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But as the day went on, doubt crept in. What if it was all just a trick? What if it was some sort of scam? Maria wasn't naive. She had seen enough hard times to know that things weren't always as they seemed. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had to go. She couldn't let fear hold her back. Maybe this was her chance, her only chance. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted. The thought of meeting someone so mysterious felt like a weight on her shoulders. But there was a spark of excitement too. She had no idea what to expect, but she had a feeling it was something big. She had no choice but to go. The address on the letter led her to a quiet, upscale part of the city, a place she had only ever passed through. The buildings were tall and modern, and the streets were lined with expensive cars. Maria felt out of place, like she didn't belong there. She adjusted her coat and walked toward the building, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. When she reached the front door, she hesitated. There was no turning back now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The lobby was immaculate, with marble floors and elegant decor. She approached the front desk, where a man in a suit greeted her with a polite smile. "Ms. Hernandez, we've been expecting you," he said. His voice was smooth and confident. "Please, follow me." Maria followed him through the hallways, feeling like she was in a dream. She had never been anywhere like this before. The man led her to a large office, where a tall, well-dressed man stood waiting by the window. He turned as she entered, his expression calm, yet somehow welcoming. "Maria," he said with a warm smile, "thank you for coming." Maria stood there, unsure of what to say. The man motioned for her to sit. "You must have questions," he said. "I know this is all very sudden, but I wanted to speak with you personally." I don't understand," Maria replied. "Why me? I'm just an ordinary woman. I don't have anything special to offer." The man smiled gently. "It's not about what you have or don't have. It's about who you are. Your kindness caught my attention. Not many people would have given up their seat for a stranger, especially when they themselves are struggling." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't thought of it that way. To her, it was just a small act, something anyone might have done. But to him, it was something much more. "I've been looking for someone like you," he continued. "Someone with a heart full of compassion. Someone who understands that the smallest acts can make the biggest difference." Maria didn't know what to say. She was still trying to process everything. He handed her a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. "This is an opportunity I'm offering you," he said. "It's a job, but not just any job. It's an opportunity that could change everything for you. It comes with a salary that would allow you to live a life free from worry. You could focus on your mother's health, your future, without having to constantly struggle. This is a chance to step into a new world." Maria's eyes widened. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought it would be some kind of charity, maybe a donation, or some small favor. But this was something much bigger. Her hands shook as she took the folder, her mind racing. The man's voice softened. You don't have to decide right now. Take your time. But I'm confident this is the right path for you. She sat there in silence, the weight of his words settling over her. It was hard to believe. She had never imagined anything like this could happen to her. I'll think about it, she finally said, her voice quiet. He nodded. Of course. Take as much time as you need. But know this, sometimes life rewards us for the kindness we show. And you, Maria, have earned that reward. Maria left the building that day in a daze. The streets no longer felt as unfamiliar, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future without fear. The possibility of a new life seemed so far away, but it was now within reach. The days that followed were a blur. Maria couldn't stop thinking about the offer, about the man's words. She kept replaying the conversation in her mind, trying to make sense of it all. How could this be real? Why would someone so wealthy and powerful want to help someone like her? She went back to her routine, working long hours, caring for her mother, and trying to ignore the growing sense of excitement and fear that the letter had sparked. The job offer seemed too good to be true, and yet, every time she tried to push it aside, the thought of what it could mean for her life pulled her back. Her mother's health had been worsening. Maria could see it in her tired eyes, in the way she moved slower each day. Every moment with her felt like it might be the last, and the thought of losing her left a sharp ache in her chest. The idea of having enough money to take care of her properly, to give her the treatment she needed, was tempting. But could she trust it? Could she trust this stranger? The next evening, Maria sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the folder the man had given her. The address on the letter seemed so far away now, like it was a different world. She picked up the folder and ran her fingers over it. The paper felt thick, the weight of it making her nervous. She had promised herself she would think it through, but the thought of saying no kept her up at night. Finally, she made up her mind. She would go back. There was nothing left to lose. She could barely afford to keep up with her bills, let alone her mother's medical expenses. This offer, this chance, was the only glimmer of hope she had. The next morning, Maria returned to the building. She walked through the lobby, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what awaited her behind that office door, but there was something inside her that knew she had to see it through. When she entered the office, the man was standing by the window again, looking out. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his expression calm but welcoming. "Maria," he said with a smile, "I'm glad you decided to come back." She nodded but didn't speak. She was still processing everything, still unsure if she was making the right choice. He gestured for her to sit down and handed her a new set of papers. "This is the official offer," he said, sliding the papers across to her. "It includes everything: salary, benefits, and a support plan for your mother's care." Maria felt a lump in her throat as she looked over the document. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. The salary alone would change her life, allow her to quit her job, and focus on her mother's health. But it was more than that. The offer spoke of stability, of a future where she no longer had to fight every day just to get by. "You'll be working with me directly," the man continued, "but there's something else I'd like to offer you." Maria looked up, her eyes meeting his. "I know this may be overwhelming, but I want to help you beyond just this job," he said gently. "I've watched you. I've seen the way you care for your mother, the way you go above and beyond for others even when you have nothing left to give. You deserve more than just a job. You deserve peace of mind. So I'm offering you a gift, something to ensure that you and your mother will always be taken care of." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. Maria's heart skipped a beat. A gift? What could he possibly mean? He handed her a small envelope, sealed with care. "This is for you. Open it when you're ready." Maria stared at the envelope, unsure of what to say. She took it in her trembling hands, nodding silently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man smiled again. "No need to thank me, Maria. This is just the beginning of what you deserve." Later that evening, back in her small apartment, Maria sat at her kitchen table, the envelope in front of her. Her mother was already asleep, and the quiet of the night surrounded her. She carefully broke the seal and pulled out its contents. Inside was a check, a sum so large it made her breath catch, and another letter. The letter read, Maria, this is not a gift. It is an investment in a person who has shown that even in the darkest moments, compassion and kindness can shine. Use it to build a life you've always dreamed of. Take care of your mother, and never stop being the light for others that you were for me. With gratitude, a friend. Tears streamed down Maria's face as she held the check and let her close. For the first time in years, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her life was about to change, not just because of the money, but because someone had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Maria sat there, stunned, the envelope feeling like a weight in her hand. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was more than just a job. This was something else entirely. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't have to say anything, he replied softly. Just know that this is my way of thanking you for your kindness, for your heart. You gave up your seat on the bus for a stranger, and in return, I want to give you a chance to live a life you deserve. With that, he stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Maria slowly got up, the envelope still in her hand. She had no idea what was inside, but the sense of uncertainty had been replaced by something else, a quiet, overwhelming feeling of hope. As Maria left the office, the envelope in her hand felt heavier than it should. She had no idea what was inside, but the thought of it lingered in her mind all the way home. She walked slowly, each step feeling uncertain, as though the world around her had shifted and she wasn't sure where she stood anymore. When she got home, her mother was asleep in her chair. Maria sat beside her for a moment, watching her sleep. The weight of the envelope felt even more real now. She didn't know if she was ready to open it, didn't know if she was ready to believe that life could truly change this suddenly. But deep down, she knew she had to know. She had to see what was in it. Gently, she placed the envelope on the table, took a deep breath, and opened it. Inside was a check for a sum of money that was more than she had ever seen in her entire life. The numbers stared back at her in disbelief. It was enough to pay off all her debts. It was enough to cover her mother's medical bills for years to come. It was enough to make sure they would never have to worry about money again. Maria's hands shook as she held the check. She couldn't believe it. It didn't feel real. She sat there, staring at it for what seemed like hours, trying to process what had just happened. Was this truly the result of one simple act of kindness? As the reality of it began to sink in, Maria's thoughts turned back to the old man, the man who had watched her, who had seen her struggle and still chose to reward her for the kindness she had shown. She had no idea how he had known about her life, but the thought that someone had noticed, someone had cared, was overwhelming. The next day, she called the number on the letter and accepted the job offer. It wasn't just the salary that made her say yes. It was the sense of belonging, the sense that she was being seen, that for once, her struggle wasn't invisible. Maria's life began to change in ways she hadn't imagined. She moved into a better apartment, found a new sense of security, and most importantly, she was able to give her mother the care she needed. It was the start of something new, something that had once seemed impossible. Years later, Maria would look back on that moment, the moment she gave up her seat on the bus, and realized that it had been the turning point. The ripple effect of her kindness had set everything into motion. And though she had never learned the full story behind the elderly man, Maria knew one thing for sure: kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Life Story for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.